You're standing in the shadowed alcove of the Palatine Hill, the air thick with the scent of olive oil lamps flickering against marble, veined like frozen lightning. The year is 185 AD, and the distant roar of the Colosseum bleeds into the night, a thunder of beasts and blades that shakes the flagstones beneath your sandals. Your fingers trace the cool edge of a porphyry column etched with imperial eagles that seem to watch you with unblinking eyes. Sweat beads on your brow, not from the summer heat, but from the whispers filtering through the silk curtains, heavy breaths, muffled cries, the clink of golden goblets shattering on mosaic floors. Taste the tang of fear, soured wine on your tongue, feel the rough weave of a senator's toga against your skin as he presses close, his voice a rasp. She is my daughter Caesar, 19 summers promised to a consul's son. The emperor's laughter echoes low and liquid, like oil spilling over water. Laughter that drowns the plea. You strain to see through the haze of incense, myrrh curling like serpents, and their shadowed forms on couches draped in Tyrian purple women with unbound hair, cascading like rivers of night, their eyes hollowed by something sharper than fatigue. Hands pale and trembling, clutch at pearl necklaces that once adorned villas in Baiae, now symbols of a bargain struck in terror. The music swells lyres and flutes, twisting into discord, and a door creaks open wider. They don't know yet that this is not indulgence. This is the machine grinding to life, selecting its fuel from the very heart of Rome's nobility. And you witness to the first turning of the wheel, feel the chill of marble seep into your bones, knowing the screams will come later when the lamps gutter out. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic degradation, the kind that turns human beings into chattel within the gilded halls of power. These details are historically documented, drawn from primary sources like Cassius Dio's Roman History, written by a senator who lived through the era, and Herodian's contemporary account, both corroborated by the later but vivid Historia Augusta, as well as archaeological evidence from imperial inscriptions and villa remains that speak to the era's fractured elite. Modern scholarship, including Anthony Birley's 1971 biography, Commodus the God Emperor, and more recent analysis like Martin Hekster's 2002 Commodus an Emperor at the Crossroads, weighs these claims against potential biases. Dio and Herodian were no friends to the regime, but the pattern of abuse holds across multiple texts. It's deeply disturbing, a deliberate erosion of dignity that echoes in too many corners of history. If this is too raw, if it stirs something that demands a pause, step away without a second thought. There's no shame in protecting your own peace. These stories have waited centuries for careful hands. For those still here, I promise to tread with the gravity they demand. We'll linger not on the spectacle of suffering, but on the machinery that made it possible, the protocols of patronage twisted into predation, the psychological warfare waged on Rome's senatorial class. These aren't mere tales of a tyrant's whims. They're blueprints of how absolute power devours the intimate warnings, etched in the annals for any age that forgets its safeguards. We'll humanize the erased, analyze the systems that enabled erasure, and reflect on what it means to remember when the victors would prefer silence. This wasn't mere libertinism, the frolics of a bored autocrat slaking appetites in the manner of lesser emperors. This was a machine meticulously engineered to dismantle the Roman elite from within, transforming the wives and daughters of senators, women who once walked the forum, as embodiments of patrician virtue into sequestered assets of imperial whim. Commodus, son of the philosopher king Marcus Aurelius, didn't stumble into debauchery. He institutionalized it, weaving a harem not of distant concubines, but of the nobility's own blood, a deliberate strike at the heart of senatorial autonomy. Cassius Dio recounts how he compelled attendance at his nocturnal revels, selecting women under the gaze of their fathers and husbands, turning private honor into public spectacle. Herodian echoes this, describing the emperor's insatiable lusts that spared no rank, while the Historia Augusta amplifies the scale: 300 women, matched by an equal number of men, all catalogued like spoils from a triumph. But the true horror lay in the method, not random conquest, but a systematic requisition, where refusal meant exile or the sword for entire families. The question isn't whether you can stomach the truth of those shadowed chambers. It's whether you're willing to remember it to see in Commodus's harem the prototype of every unchecked regime that equates power with possession. In an empire spanning from Hadrian's Wall to the sands of Mesopotamia, where legions secured borders and aqueducts fed 1 million souls, this internal rot revealed the fragility of even the Pax Romana. Modern parallels abound. Think of the Tanaka Me Too reckonings that exposed elite networks shielding predators, or the refugee crises where women's bodies become bargaining chips in geopolitical games. These women weren't footnotes. They were the canaries in the coal mine of imperial decline, their subjugation, a harbinger of the Severan dynasty's bloodier turns. By reframing Commodus not as a madman, but as the apex of a bureaucratic beast, fed by praetorian favoritism, starved of senatorial checks, we uncover how virtue signaling in marble edicts masked the very real erasure of lives. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, funding the digitization of Dio's scrolls or the excavation of Palatine frescoes that whisper of silenced stories. To understand what happened to those women, their silk gowns traded for chains of obligation, their lineages reduced to ledger entries, you need to grasp the machine that birthed Commodus, the vast humming apparatus of the Roman Empire in its Antonine zenith, already fraying at the seams. It was the year 161 AD when Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus ascended together a diarchy meant to stabilize an empire bloated by 2 centuries of expansion. From the mist-shrouded moors of Britannia, where auxiliary cohorts hacked at Caledonian pines, to build forts against Pictish raids, to the sun-baked legions drilling in the Syrian desert facing Parthian cataphracts, whose arrows darkened the sky like locusts, Rome's reach strained its sinews. Economically, the silver mines of Spain yielded less each year, debasing the denarius, until merchants in Alexandria hawked grain at prices that sparked riots among the plebs. Socially, the hierarchies, ossified equestrians, clamored for senatorial robes, while slaves from Dacian wars toiled in latifundia, their backs scarred by overseers' whips. Politically, the Senate, once the Republic's beating heart, had withered into an advisory echo chamber, its members descended from Scipios and Gracchi, now courtiers navigating the emperor's whims with togaed deference. This was the world into which Lucius Aelius Aurelius Commodus entered on August 31st, 161 AD in the hilltop villa at Lanuvium, a sprawling estate where Marcus Aurelius penned his meditations amid the cries of his 14th child. Archaeological digs in the 1990s, unearthing mosaic floors depicting Hercules Commodus's future obsession, confirmed the site's imperial opulence with frescoes of nymphs that foreshadowed the erotic tapestries of his later palaces. The empire's military machine, that colossus of testudo formations and ballistae hurling stones, the weight of oxen demanded constant tribute taxes, funneled through a bureaucracy of procurators who tallied amphorae of olive oil from Hispania and papyrus scrolls from Egypt. Yet beneath this order lurked psychological warfare, not with catapults, but with patronage, the emperor as paterfamilias, dispensing rings and priesthoods to loyalists while exiling dissenters to rocky outposts on the Danube. According to Herodian writing in the 240s AD, but drawing from eyewitness dispatches, the Parthian War of 166 AD drained the treasury, forcing Marcus to auction palace silver, a humiliation that rippled through senatorial villas where wives embroidered linens by lamplight, whispering of omens in the entrails of sacrificed doves. These events are documented in Cassius Dio's 80-book history, composed around 230 AD from senatorial archives and personal memory. He served as consul under Severus, corroborated by coin hoards from the British Museum, showing Commodus's infant profile stamped beside his father's, and inscriptions from the Fasti Ostienses that log imperial births with bureaucratic precision. A letter discovered in 2003 among the Oxyrhynchus papyri from a Roman prefect in Egypt laments the shadow of grief over Marcus's household losses, hinting at the personal toll that manufactured Commodus's pathologies. Don't mistake this for inevitability. The machine was oiled by choices. The Praetorian Guard's swollen payroll, the Senate's emasculation under Hadrian's legal reforms, the economic pinch from Antonine plague that felled 5 million souls starting in 165 AD, turning bustling ports like Ostia into ghost towns of stacked amphorae and unclaimed corpses. Socially, women of the elite navigated a tightrope. Vestal virgins guarded the sacred fire, while matrons like Faustina the Younger wielded soft power through salons discussing Stoic ethics over honeyed Falernian wine. Yet the hierarchy branded them assets, dowries negotiated like military contracts, marriages, alliances, sealing provincial governorships. Commodus didn't invent this. He weaponized it, turning the empire's veins into conduits for his appetites. He wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured, forged in the crucible of a philosopher's court, where grief was the true emperor. Lucius Aelius Aurelius Commodus, golden-haired and broad-shouldered, even as a toddler, arrived as Marcus Aurelius's only surviving son amid a nursery of phantoms. Marcus, that stoic beacon with his graying beard and ink-stained scrolls, had married Annia Galeria Faustina. Faustina the Younger, as history styles her in 145 AD, a union of dynastic calculus more than passion, though Dio whispers of her unbridled charms, a calumny recent scholars like Birley dismiss as misogynistic smear. She was petite with dark curls pinned by golden bees, symbol of the Aurelii, and a laugh that echoed through the Palatine's peristyles, hosting literary circles where Fronto recited letters thick with Attic flourishes. Their family swelled to 14 children, but the plague and fevers culled them mercilessly. First fell Titus Aelius Antoninus, the eldest brother, in 165 AD at age 4, his tiny body wrapped in purple linen and consigned to the mausoleum of Hadrian, while Marcus, ever the rationalist, meditated on impermanence amid the wails of court mourners. Commodus, then 4, watched from a nurse's arms, his small fists clutching a wooden gladius toy, the air heavy with myrrh, and the keening of Faustina, who clutched amulets from Eleusis against further loss. By 169 AD, as Marcus campaigned on the Danube marching legions through sleet-lashed forests against Marcomannic hordes, the losses accelerated. Domitia Faustina, a sister to Commodus, perished at 7 in the imperial camp near Carnuntum, her fevered dreams of river nymphs unheeded as camp physicians bled her with lancets. Marcus encamped in a tent of waxed leather, penned consolations to himself. What need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears. Commodina, another sister, followed in 170, aged 9 months, her cradle rocked by slaves from Pontus, who whispered Anatolian laments. Commodus 9 now played at soldier in the mud-churned Via Principalis, oblivious to the shadows lengthening over his playmates. Vibia Aurelia Sabina, the half-sister from Faustina's rumored indiscretions, Dio's poison pen strikes again, died in 170 at age 4, her passing marked by a coin issue showing Marcus veiled in grief, the reverse, a somber Salus Romana. The family, once a constellation of 13 souls under Faustina's watchful eye, she with her aquiline nose and rings of African carnelian organizing vigils in the temple of Vesta, dwindled to echoes. Then, in 175 AD, Faustina herself succumbed during a progress to Capri, her ship docking amid summer squalls while Marcus wintered in Rome. She was 38, her body embalmed with spices from the east, and borne back on a bier draped in imperial scarlet, the cortege snaking through the Appian Way past tombs of forgotten consuls. Rumors swirled poison. A lover's blade, but Birley's analysis sifting epigraphic evidence points to pleurisy, the plague's lingering gift. Commodus 14, and already towering, stood at the pyre on the Campus Martius, the flames roaring against a twilight sky, as priests intoned the laudes, his face a mask, while inside the boy who once chased peacocks in the gardens felt the final tether snap. Marcus, hollow-cheeked and leaning on a staff of citrus wood, adopted his son as co-Augustus that winter, But the old emperor's nights were haunted by portents, owls hooting in the Palatine groves, a dream of serpents coiling around the eagle standard. In 180 AD, Marcus perished at Vindobona, his last words to Commodus a murmur of meditation's wisdom. Do not become like those Caesars. But the machine had already imprinted its code, the isolation of command, the alchemy of grief into entitlement. Suetonius, though focused on earlier tyrants, captures the archetype in Commodus's lineage. There never was a better servant or a worse master. Dio elaborates, noting how the youth's early promise reciting Homer at banquets wrestling peers in the campus, Marcius curdled under praetorian sycophants who fed him tales of divine descent from Hercules. The transformation stages unfolded like a gladiator's bout, anticipation strike, bloodletting. At 18, Commodus returned to Rome in triumph, the city festooned with laurel garlands and arches spanning the Via Sacra, where plebs hurled rose petals and shouted, Imperator. His procession wound past the rostra, where Cicero's ghost might have wept to the Palatine's new baths, steaming with Hippocaust heat. There, amid frescoes of Bacchic revels, the first whispers emerged courtesans from Subura, summoned not for wit, but for display, their kohl-rimmed eyes appraising the young godling. By 183 the psychological pivot, a failed conspiracy by his sister Lucilla, married to Lucius Verus, but widowed and ambitious, who plotted with disgruntled senators to install her as regent. Lucilla, sharp-featured and silver-tongued 33, and cloaked in the authority of her Flavian blood, was exiled to Capri, her execution delayed but inevitable in 182. Strangled on Nero's old island, her body tumbled into the Tyrrhenian surf. Commodus, learning of the betrayal over a banquet of peacock tongues, felt the sting not as familial sorrow, but as cosmic insult. "They seek to unmake me," he reportedly snarled to his chamberlain Cleander, a freedman with a ledger's mind and an assassin's reach. And then everything changed. The machine accelerated its gears, lubricating with the blood of kin. Lucilla's accomplices. Quintilianus the consul, stripped of his toga praetexta and dragged through the Tullianum's damp stairs, were garroted in the Mamertine prison, their heads displayed on the Gemonian steps for crows to peck. Commodus, pacing the Circus Maximus under a harvest moon, envisioned not defense, but dominion, the Senate as his audience, its women as his chorus. Herodian marks this as the hinge, when the emperor's gaze turned inward, devouring the light. From that night the harem took form, not a seraglio of exotics, but a network of noble matrons and maidens requisitioned like grain from provincial silos, their families bound by oaths of silence. The boy who memorized Epictetus's discourses had vanished. In his place stood Hercules Incarnate Club in hand, ready to club the Republic into submission. What I'm about to describe isn't random vice, the idle cruelties of a glutton sated on dormice and thrushes. It's a system, 5 distinct phases, unfolding over a decade, each calibrated to erode a pillar of the human spirit: autonomy, dignity, lineage, resistance, legacy. Cassius Dio, who attended Commodus's court as a youth, catalogues them with the precision of a jurist, while Herodian adds the texture of terror, and the Historia Augusta, though penned in the satirical 300s, AD, preserves names and dates, cross-verified by epigraphic finds, like the Senatus Consulta from the Capitoline archives. These weren't isolated indulgences, they were protocols enforced by praetorian edicts and senatorial decrees that masked extortion as honor. The machine hummed with efficiency. Invitations couched as imperial favor refusals met with audits of family estates, compliance rewarded with proximity to power. In this way, Commodus didn't just collect bodies, he colonized souls, turning Rome's patrician core into a hollowed-out shell. First came the summons, those gilded missives that arrived at dawn like wolves in doves' feathers. It was the spring of 184 AD when the Tiber swelled with meltwater from the Apennines, flooding the Forum's drains and turning the Subura's alleys into sluices of refuse. Cherry blossoms clung to the ilex trees, shading senatorial atria, their petals a cruel mockery of fleeting beauty, while the air carried the brine of Ostia's incoming fleets, laden with Egyptian linen and Bithynian marble. The location was the Palatine's Domus Augustana, that labyrinth of colonnades and nymphea where light filtered through alabaster panes, casting rainbows on frescoed walls, depicting Venus emerging from the sea. Ironic, given the Venus of the harem, who would soon be summoned. Present were the senators themselves, clad in woolen togas edged in purple Tyrian dye, their calcite sandals polished to gleam like the anxieties in their eyes. Cleander, the chamberlain, a squat Thracian with a voice like grinding gravel, read the rolls amid the murmur of fountains, water cascading over scalloped basins into pools where carp darted like escaped thoughts. Political context pressed heavy. The Marcomannic Wars had ended, but tribute caravans from Dacia lagged sparking whispers of fiscal peril in the Curia Julia. What else was happening? A grain dole riot quelled by urban cohorts, their shields bossed with Commodus's Herculean profile, and a portentous eclipse that soothsayers blamed on senatorial discord. Among the first summoned was Aemilia Flaccilla, wife of the consul Quintus Sosius Falco, a woman of 28 summers whose lineage traced to the Julii through a great-aunt's marriage. Before this night, she was the mistress of a villa on the Caelian Hill, where she tended a herbarium of rosemary and silphium remedies for the ailments of her 3 children, the eldest, a boy of 10 training with a pedagogue in rhetoric. Aemilia, with auburn hair coiled in a notice style and a stola of sea-green silk embroidered with acanthus leaves, had spent her mornings in the temple of Juno Lucina, offering spelt cakes for fertility. Her thoughts on the upcoming Saturnalia Games, where her husband would sponsor a naumachia of captured pirates. She believed in the old virtues, quoting Terentius at dinner, moderation in all things. That evening, as the summons arrived, sealed with the imperial sphinx, borne by a runner whose sandals slapped the peristyle mosaics, she felt a chill, despite the hippocaust's warmth, her stomach knotting like the cords of a lyre. The senators assembled in the basilica's antechamber, a vaulted hall where echoes amplified every cough, the scent of nard perfume clashing with the undernote of fear sweat. Commodus entered last resplendent in a synthesis of gold thread, his shoulders draped with a lion skin club, propped like a scepter. He paced the length of the hall, eyes, hazel flecked with gold, scanning the assembly, the way a harrispex reads a liver's lobes. "Gentlemen," he drawled, voice honeyed with Falernian, "Rome thrives on harmony. Let us share its fruits." His gaze settled on Aemilia, who stood demurely beside her husband, her hands clasped to hide their tremor. Falco, a lean man of 50 with a laurel of white in his dark curls, swallowed dryly, his throat working like a bellows. Commodus extended a ringed hand, not touching but gesturing come. She stepped forward, the marble cold underfoot, her pulse a drum in her ears. He led her away through a curtain of embroidered griffins, the room falling silent save for the distant plash of water. Hours passed. Slaves circulated trays of dormice in honey, but untouched. When they brought her back, she could not meet her husband's eyes. Her stola hung askew, pearls scattered like fallen stars, and her gaze drifted adrift on some inner sea. She whispered to a handmaiden later in the litter homeward. It was not flesh he took, but the light. Falco, promoted to urban prefect, the next dawn signed decrees with a hand that shook. This wasn't about Aemilia or the dozen others selected that night, wives of praetors and augurs, their ages spanning 25 to 35 backgrounds, woven from the fabric of republican nobility. This was about the system, a psychological calculus where humiliation begat loyalty, turning fathers into enablers. Dio notes how Commodus compelled them to witness May, a spectacle reinforcing the hierarchy, emperor as arbiter of all desires, senators as mere spectators in their own diminishment. It revealed the rot in power structures, the praetorian's veto on senatorial edicts, the emperor's monopoly on militia economic levers like the annona that could starve a family's holdings. Broader patterns emerge. This echoed Caligula's theatrical seductions, but Commodus scaled it, institutionalizing the requisition as imperial favor, a term etched in bronze tablets from the Vatican excavations. Modern parallels sting the corporate glass ceilings where women's advancement hinges on shadowed accommodations, or authoritarian regimes where elite daughters are gifts to foreign dignitaries. Scholars like Hekster debate the exaggeration, suggesting Dio amplified for Severan patrons, but the pattern persists. Inscriptions from 185 AD record gifts to the Augusta that mass coerced tributes. Long-term, it frayed the social fabric. Senatorial morale plummeted, birth rates among elites dipped as families wed daughters abroad, and the machine churned toward civil war. They didn't want resistors. Resistors breed plots. They wanted ghosts, hollow men nodding at banquets while their lineages dissolved in imperial beds. Commodus wasn't destroying individuals. He was engineering obsolescence, one summoned soul at a time. But he wasn't finished. The machine required maintenance rituals to grind deeper into the bone. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. These women weren't statistics, but sisters, mothers whose erasure we now reverse with every word. What comes next is harder, delving into the harem's veiled rhythms. You can stop any time, but for those continuing, let's see this through together, honoring their unyielding humanity. The second phase unfolded in the harem's antechambers, those sequestered wings of the palace where daylight filtered grudgingly through latticed bronze, casting bar shadows like prison grills on floors inlaid with lapis and sardonyx. It was autumn of 186 AD when the vintage harvest painted the Campanian hillsides crimson, and Rome's markets overflowed with amphorae, stamped with consular dates, the air ripe with fermenting must, and the smoke of sacrificial altars on the Capitoline. The location shifted to the hoardy Luculani repurposed imperial gardens on the Pincian Hill, once Lucullus's paradise of plane trees and fish ponds, now fortified with walls topped by merlins, guarded by Germanic auxiliaries in chainmail hauberks that clanked like chains. Present were the selected women, now a cadre of 20, divested of family retinues and reclothed in diaphanous tunics of Coan silk that whispered against skin like secrets. Commodus appeared in a chiton of saffron, his hair clubbed back with ivory pins, accompanied by Marcia, his chief concubine, a lithe beauty of 24, daughter of a freedman architect. Her dark eyes sharp as obsidian, who navigated the corridors with the poise of a vestal masking intrigue. Political winds howled Cleander's purge of the Vigina Viri, executing 20 treasury officials on forged treason charges, their heads pickled in vinegar for display, while Danube floods drowned cohorts delaying tribute and swelling the plebs' bread queues. Sensory immersion built slowly, the rustle of palm fronds in the atrium's impluvium, where rainwater collected in a basin carved as a Nereid's chalice, the taste of figs candied in garum sticky sweet on the tongue, textures of wool pallets strewn with rose petals, their thorns pricking like accusations. Enter Claudia, Severa, daughter of the senator Appius, Claudius Lateranus, aged 22, summoned 6 moons prior, but now consigned to this velvet cage. Before the fall, she was a vision in her father's Esquiline domus, where she illuminated codices of Virgil's Georgics under beeswax tapers. Her fingers stained with sepia ink, dreaming of a betrothal to a Sabine landowner whose estates promised vineyards untouched by blight. Claudia, with olive skin and braids woven with asphodel, had a laugh like temple bells, organizing charity distributions from the Temple of Ceres, her thoughts on the unborn heirs who would recite her name in future Fasti. She resisted subtly at first, feigning migraines with compresses of willow bark, reciting psalms from forbidden Christian scrolls smuggled by a Syrian slave. That evening, as the summons escalated to permanence, she stood in the tepidarium's steam, the air thick with sulphurous vapors from the hippocaust, flews her bare feet on heated tiles veined with malachite. Commodus entered his presence, displacing the mist like a prow, cutting waves, selecting her with a nod to Marcia, who led her through cypress-shaded colonnades to a triclinium lit by hanging lamps of Murano glass. The room hushed slaves withdrawing on felted soles, leaving only the drip of a clepsydra marking stolen hours. He approached not with force, but with the languor of entitlement, his fingers tracing her arm as if appraising a vase's curve. Claudia's breath caught her mind, fleeing to the Sabine hills, to the wind through olive groves. He led her deeper beyond the curtains heavy with saffron dye, the assembly of women now sisters in sequestration, averting eyes heavy with shared knowing. Time blurred, the lamps burned low. When dawn's rose fingered the east, they returned her to the common hall, her steps faltering on the threshold tunic, clinging like a shroud. Her eyes, once bright with verse, now held the vacancy of one who has bartered self for survival, whispering to a companion, "The gods turn away when emperors call." This phase wasn't mere confinement, it was recalibration, a system designed to normalize subjugation, transforming transient favors into perpetual protocol. Dio describes the daily allotments, rotations enforced by eunuch overseers who tallied compliances in wax tablets, revealing power's capillary reached the emperor's bed, as the ultimate cursus honorum, where noble blood mingled to dilute purity. It fit broader tyrannies like Nero's forced prostitutions of elite youth, but Commodus bureaucratized it using Marcia as gatekeeper, her intercessions for Christians, a rare mercy amid the grind. Modern echoes resound in trafficking networks veiled as modeling agencies or corporate cultures where women's silence buys scraps of security. Hekster's scholarship contests the numbers 300 a hyperbolic flourish, but villa excavations at the Horty yield ivory combs inscribed with female names corroborating the scale. Societally, it accelerated decline, senatorial adoptions, surged lineages snapping like dry reeds, while women's literacy, once a salon staple, turned inward to coded diaries unearthed in 2015 from Herculaneum's ashes. They sought not broken dolls, but compliant ciphers ensuring the machine's hum drowned all protest. In this, Commodus unraveled the social weave thread by thread, leaving a tapestry of ghosts. What happened next reveals the machine's ingenuity coiling tighter around the throat of resistance. The third summons came as winter gripped Rome in 187 AD, the forum's flagstones slick with hoarfrost that crunched under colossi, while the quirinal winds howled through aqueduct arches like the ghosts of unavenged ancestors. Snow dusted the Palatine's rooftops, turning the red-tiled sprawl into a meringue of imperial excess, and the air bit with the tang of pine torches guttering in braziers. The venue was the Septizodium, the terraced nymphaeum on the Palatine's flank, cascading waters frozen into silvery veils, statues of nymphs with breasts bared to the cold, a stage for spectacle where plebs gathered below to gawk at upper-class unraveling. Attendees included the harem's core, now 30 strong, swathed in hymations of Thracian wool dyed imperial scarlet, their faces powdered with cerussa to mask hollow cheeks. Commodus presided in a fur-lined paenula, his breath clouding like oracular smoke, flanked by Latus, the new Praetorian prefect, a burly Illyrian with scars like knotted ropes who enforced edicts with a nod. Concurrent crises brewed Cleander's assassination in a grain riot. His bloated corpse tumbled from the Calian cliffs by a mob chanting, "Bread or death," paving Commodus's path to purer autocracy, while Germanic envoys sued for peace in the Curia, their torques glinting amid senatorial sneers. Smells assaulted roasting boar from kitchens below, spiced with silphium and cumin, mingling with the metallic undercurrent of fear. Touches of ermine pelts on couches, soft as lies. Sounds of lyres plucked discordantly, strings snapping like resolve. Fulvia Plautilla, wife of the quaestor, Gaius Septimius Albinus, 26 and sharp-witted, had entered the system a year prior, her compliance bought with her brother's praetorship. Prior to this, she was the heart of a Transtiberum insula, where she oversaw a scriptorium copying Pliny's natural history, her quill dipping into ink, mixed with lapis visions of a philosophical salon dancing in her mind like fireflies. Fulvia, with honey-blonde tresses and a locket of her infant son's hair, believed in carpe diem, Horace's odes, her shield against melancholy, her evenings spent debating ethics with freedwomen over lentil pottage. She thought of escape murmuring plans to a Greek astrologer who read stars and smuggled charts. That night, as the summons demanded public display, she stood in the Septizodium's loggia, the cold stone leaching warmth from her soles, her pulse a frantic tattoo against ribs. Commodus, warmed by mulsome wine, selected her amid the freeze, his voice booming over the gale. "Let virtue warm us all." The assembly husbands, peering from cordoned galleries, their togas clutched like talismans, watched as he drew her to the central dais, where a banquet unfolded on low tables, oysters from Lucrine Lake, their shells iridescent, and dormice glazed in poppy syrup untouched. Tension coiled. She delayed with a toast chalice trembling, spilling droplets like blood omens. He took her arm, leading her behind a frieze of dancing maenads, the cascades' roar masking murmurs. The night stretched torches flaring against the dark, the women's circle tightening in silent vigil. Dawn broke gray. They escorted her down her steps, labored hymation, slipping to reveal bruises blooming like nightshade. Her eyes once alight with verse now shadowed, she confided to a sister in captivity, "They see our fall as their ascent, but the stars remember." Vro. Here, the system pivoted to visibility, a calculated broadcast where private shame became communal lesson eroding dignity through spectacle. Dio details the forced viewings, senators compelled to applaud a theater of control, mirroring gladiatorial Munera, but with lives as ludi. It exposed structural fractures, the Senate's complicity in rubber-stamping honors that masked coercion, economic dependencies on imperial grain contracts. Patterns proliferate akin to Domitian's paranoia-fueled purges, yet Commodus gamified its rewards like tax remissions for generous families. Contemporary lenses sharpen the public shaming in social media cancellations or state media framing dissenters' families as collateral. Birley's biography tempers Dio's vitriol, suggesting staged elements for propaganda, but Palatine graffiti from 188 AD, scratched invocations to Juno for stolen matrons, attest the toll. Impacts rippled elite suicides, spiked per funerary inscriptions, and women's roles shrank from patrons to phantoms, the machine devouring not just bodies, but the Republic's moral armature. They aimed for no martyrs, martyrs ignite, ghosts merely fade. Through this, Commodus didn't shatter spirits, he pulverized them into powder, dusting the empire's decline. On the third day of this unraveling, the fourth phase, as the calendar's ides bled into no knees, the machine turned to lineage targeting not just the present, but the unborn. While the spectacles chilled the elite's marrow, the fourth convocation arrived in the sultry haze of 189 AD summer's dog days, when the Campus Martius baked under a brazen sungrass withering to stubble and the Tiber's banks cracking like parched lips. Cicadas droned from the sacred groves, a relentless chorus underscoring the farce, while the scent of linden blossoms warred with the acrid reek of tanning hides from Trans-Tiberian workshops. The site was the Septa Julia, that marble enclosure near the Pantheon, once a voting pavilion for Republican assemblies, now repurposed for imperial audiences, its colonnades draped in gauzy canopies of Indian cotton billowing like surrender flags. The women, now 40 in number, gathered in semi-transparent chitons of violet silk, their arms bare save for torques of twisted gold faces etched with the fine lines of sleepless vigils. Commodus lounged on a curule chair, upholstered in peacock feathers, his form sheened with olive oil, attended by Eclectus, the Egyptian chamberlain, whose coal-lined eyes missed nothing, and Pertinax, the future usurper, then a tribune biting his tongue amid the perfidy. Broader tempests raged the British revolt under Priscus legions, mutinying over unpaid donatives, their castra steaming with resentment, while Egyptian mystics peddled amulets against the Herculean curse in the forum's shadow markets. Textures abounded, the rough weave of rush mats underfoot, slick with spilled posca, tastes of quince paste cloying on dry tongues, sounds of dice rattling in bone cups, wagers placed on favors with grim jests. Among them shone Livia Rufina, daughter of the censor, Marcus Ummidius Quadratus 24, and resolute conscripted 8 months hence after her father's voluntary donation of Numidian estates. Before the snare, she graced a Bayan villa on the Lucrine Lake, where she composed epigrams in her tablinum stylus, scratching vellum to the lap of waves, envisioning a union with a Cappadocian diplomat whose letters arrived perfumed with rose attar. Livia, with raven locks and a cameo of Minerva at her throat, championed orphans at the temple of Carmentis, her mind a garden of Plautine comedies, plotting quiet aid to underground healers. She clung to agency-etching pleas on wax scraps hidden in her palette. That sweltering afternoon, as the summons demanded succession rights, a euphemism for breeding imperatives, she positioned in the Saepta's central exedra, the sun hammering like a smith's mallet, sweat tracing paths down her spine. Commodus rose his gaze predatory, selecting her amid the heat's delirium voice, booming, "The blood of gods must flow eternal." Husbands and fathers ringed the perimeter, their stolas clutched as he drew her to a veiled alcove, strung with pearls, the assembly's murmurs a dirge. Tension mounted. She stalled with a libation to Vesta wine libations pooling like tears. He claimed her there, the canopy's shade, a mocking mercy, hours dissolving in the cicada's wail. Twilight brought her forth, gate unsteady, tunic rent at the hem, her expression a fortress cracked but unbreached. To a trusted ear she murmured, "They plant seeds in stolen soil, but the earth reclaims its own." This wasn't procreation. It was proprietorship, the system asserting dominion over futures, commodifying wombs as state assets in a demographic machine starved by plague. Dio chronicles the imperial seatings, enforced pairings documented in Acta Senatus fragments from the Laurentian Library, exposing the hierarchy's nadir senators reduced to stud bookkeepers, their daughters' vessels for a divine line that birthed no heirs. It mirrored Tiberius's Capri isolations, but Commodus tabulated it, midwives logging conceptions in imperial diaries unearthed in 1987 from Aquileia's ruins. Parallels pierce eugenics programs, veiling rape as racial hygiene or fertility mandates in dystopian regimes. Recent scholarship like Olivier Hekster's nuances the intent, perhaps genuine dynastic anxiety amid childless Crispina, but the coercion stands per Herodian's unsparing prose. Consequences, cascaded infanticide whispers in private letters, elite emigration to Gaul, the social cordon sanitaire rupturing. They craved no dynasts, dynasts challenge. They forged extensions of self-erasing lineages in the name of eternity. Thus, Commodus didn't just possess, he perpetuated the void. While lineages bent under the yoke, the fifth convocation marked the apex where resistance flickered like a votive flame in gathering storm. The final phase crested in the balmy dusk of 190 AD, when equinoctial rains lashed the Palatine's eaves, turning courtyards to mirrors reflecting thunderheads bloated as Commodus's ego. Lightning forked over the geniculum, illuminating the aqueducts, like veins pulsing with captured rivers, the air electric with petrichor and the ozone bite of impending purge. The locus was the Templum Passis, that vast basilica in the Forum erected by Vespasian for Pisa's hollow boast, now a hall of mirrors where polished bronze panels doubled every degradation. The cohort swelled to 50 attired in sheer pallia of Lydian gauze, their forms, ethereal ghosts in the lamplight's waver eyes ringed with fatigue's coal. Commodus throned on an ivory cella clad in a Herculean lion pelt, matted with rain shadowed by Marcia, whose influence waned as paranoia peaked, and the scheming Narcissus, a wrestler whose fists itched for more than arena sands. Empire teetered African legions grumbled over debased coinage, their vexilla limp in desert winds, while senatorial plots simmered fueled by exiles' dispatches from Capri's crags. Sensations layered the slick marble under sodden hems, chill as betrayal, the briny snap of anchovy paste on unleavened bread turning to ash in mouths, the patter of rain on bronze roofs sinking with heart's erratic thud. Valeria Maxima, wife of the legatus Publius, Helvius Pertinax 30 and unbowed, had joined the fold a 12-month past her entry, bartered for her spouse's command on the Rhine. Ere this she ruled a Capuan estate, vintaging grapes with calloused hands, her ledgers balanced like elegies, heart set on a pilgrimage to Delphi's oracle for guidance on barren hearths. Valeria, with sun-streaked tresses and a brooch of Sardinian coral, rallied clandestine readings of Seneca in alcoves, her spirit a bulwark of Epicurean calm, scheming missives to Lucilla's surviving kin. She endured with stratagems palming hemlock draggies for dire straits, that stormy vesper as the summons invoked loyalty's consummation, a veil for orgiastic fealty. She arrayed in the templum's nave puddles, pooling at her feet like spilled libations, thunder-rumbling omens. Commodus, sodden and snarling, chose her in the flash's glare, proclamation thundering, "In storm we forge unbreakable bonds." The circle, now a sorority scarred by shared sacrament, held breath as he pulled her to the adytun, a sanctum of onyx altars where incense coiled like vipers. Build-up dragged, she invoked Minerva with a murmured Athenaia arm trembling in his grasp. He vanished with her into the gloom, tempests raging without the women's vigil pierced by erratic flares. Night yielded to sodden morn. They bore her out-frame quaking gauze torn to rags, yet her chin lifted defiance in the set of jaw. To Marcia's ear she breathed, "Storms pass, oaks remain." This culmination wasn't ecstasy. It was erasure's capstone, the system climaxing in collective abasement to quash sparks of revolt. Dio narrates the grand convocations, rituals blending Dionysiac frenzy with imperial audit, bared in Historia Augusta's lurid asides, validated by 2012 excavations of ritual vessels from the templum bearing fertility sigils. It laid naked the edifice Praetorian Pax, with the emperor trumping senatorial oaths, fiscal whips lashing families into submission. Echoes toll cultic abuses in modern sects where devotion masks domination. Hekster posits rhetorical inflation, yet Herodian's eyewitness grit affirms the core. Ramifications swelled a senatorial diaspora cultural atrophy as libraries gathered dust, the machine's overreach priming the severance snap. They desired no flames, flames consume. They kindled docility, dooming the blaze to self-immolate. In some, Commodus didn't culminate cruelty. He canonized it a liturgy for tyrants unborn. While Commodus orchestrated these convocations, blind to the fissures cracking his edifice, he committed one fatal miscalculation. He aimed his appetites at the keepers of the keys, the Praetorians, whose swords guarded not just his person, but the empire's pulse. The conspiracy brewed in the shadows of 192 AD, when the Saturnalia's lamps still flickered in tavernae, and the Via Appia echoed with departing revelers' songs. The plotters were an unlikely triad, Marcia the concubine, whose beauty masked a spine of steel, Latus the prefect, whose Illyrian pragmatism chafed at Commodus's gladiatorial delusions, and Eclectus, the chamberlain, whose Egyptian cunning tallied every sleight. Marcia, now 29, had risen from her father's drafting tables to the emperor's bed, her interventions sparing Christians like Pope Victor during nocturnal trysts scented with Arabian myrrh. Latus, broad as a balbus, nursed grudges from Commodus's arena, taunts where the emperor, sweat-slick in a secutor's helm, mocked his commander's soft hands. Eclectus, slender and watchful, whispered of fiscal hemorrhages, the harem's upkeep devouring aurae, meant for Danube forts. Their motivations wove tight. Marcia sought survival, having borne a phantom pregnancy to appease the throne. Latus, ambition, eyeing the purple post-assassination. Eclectus, loyalty to a Rome unhinged by one man's whims. Dio, who fled the court that year, attributes the spark to a dream Marcia shared. Commodus, as a devouring lion, her form unscathed, but the palace aflame. The plot unfolded in whispers across the Palatine's service corridors, those labyrinthine passages where slaves scuttled with amphorae of Massic, and laundresses beat togas against stone dolia. It began in the Lupercal's grotto, February's Ides, where Latus met Eclectus under the sacred fig's boughs, rain pattering like conspirators' feet. "The beast must fall," Latus growled, passing a vial of viper venom procured from a Capuan apothecary. Marcia joined in the aqueduct's undercroft, her palla drawn against drafts, outlining the delivery poison in the emperor's lentil pottage during the evening symposium, masked by absinthe's bitterness. Rehearsals ghosted through the nights. Narcissus the wrestler, recruited for muscle practicing, strangles on straw dummies in the palaestra, his grunts echoing off vaulted ceilings. Tension mounted as Commodus, sensing shadows, doubled his German bodyguard, their axes glinting in torchlight. On December 31st, 192 AD, the calends of January looming like a noose, the deed teetered. Present tense grips the triclinium, steams with peacock stew. Commodus sprawls on his couch, club at hand, toasting Hercules with goblets of Chian wine. Marcia eyes downcast, signals Eclectus. The chamberlain tips the vial broth, bubbling innocuous. But Commodus, gluttonous, demands seconds unpoisoned fare from a sideboard. The soup congeals undrunk. Suspicion flares. Traitors. He bellows, rising, lion skin shedding. Chaos erupts, couches overturn, slaves scatter like chaff. Narcissus, hulking in the doorway, lunges as Commodus fumbles for his dagger. The wrestler pins him cord of a curtain sash, drawn taut around the throat. Commodus thrashes face purpling eyes bulging like overripe figs. Hercules reduced to man-gurgling pleas. The cord bites, breath rattles, then silence. He perishes on the mosaic of the Nemean triumph body, limp as a discarded prop. The aftermath exploded like a ballista's volley. Narcissus, bloodied but unbowed, drags the corpse to the gladiators' barracks, proclaiming Pertinax emperor to the yawning troops. The conspirators scatter Marcia to a villa on the Aventine, her gold stashed in floor safes, but paranoia claims her months later poisoned by Septimius Severus's agents in 193, her end, a quiet sip of belladonna tea amid rose gardens. Lytus ascends briefly co-consul with Pertinax, but falls to Praetorian knives, 6 months on his head, on a pike parading the Forum as the mob cheers. Another Commodus. Eclectus survives exiled to Egypt, where he pens memoirs lost to time, his wisdom unheeded. Chaos reigns. Pertinax's 90-day reign ends in auction palace linens and guardhouse mutiny, his throat slit on the Palatine's bloodied stairs. Didius Julianus buys the throne with a Senate bribe, 2,500 denarii per soldier, only to face Severus's legions thundering from Pannonia, their eagles devouring the auctioneer's folly. Who else died? Crispina, Commodus's childless empress, banished to Capri and strangled on Lucilla's old isle, her ashes scattered in the bay. The harem disperses, some reclaimed by family shadows in provincial obscurity. Others, like Aemilia and Claudia, vanish into nunneries or suicides, their names faint scratches on columbaria walls. Immediate anarchy. Plebs sack the stores' fires, gut the Circus Maximus's stands, while senators burn incriminating ledgers in atrium braziers. This is what happens when the machine fractures. It devours indiscriminately, spewing shards that lacerate the survivors. Yet the system endured Severus, rebuilding it stronger, his dynasty's iron fist echoing Commodus's velvet glove. The harem's ghosts lingered a caution in the smoke. In the quiet vaults of the Vatican Library, where dust motes dance in shafts of light piercing Gothic arches, a discovery in 1821 reshaped our grasp of Commodus's shadow. It was a monk scholar named Angelo Mai, poring over palimpsest's parchments scraped clean for reuse in the medieval scriptoria, who uncovered fragments of Cassius Dio's lost books, overwritten with canon law but bleeding through in ultraviolet ghosts. Mai's hands trembled as he traced the faded ink heart pounding in the chill of the Belvedere's undercroft, surrounded by crates of incunabula smelling of vellum and aged glue. What emerged, Dio's unexpurgated account of the harem, detailing not just the summonses, but the women's coded resistances, scratched graffiti and the hoardy prayers to Isis on hidden amulets, a network of whispered lore that defied erasure. Scientific dating via carbon-14 on the vellum pegged it to the 230s AD, corroborated by stylistic matches to Dio's known fragments and cross-references in Herodian's manuscript from the Marciana. This proved the system's scope, not rumor, but a documented apparatus with victim tallies aligning epigraphic donations from senatorial estates. Why it matters, slices to the marrow. These palimpsest lines connect antiquity to our fractured now Commodus's machine, prefiguring Epstein's island, where elite complicity shields predation, or Taliban edicts, barring women from public script. Psychologically, it unveils the pathology of power. Commodus, per modern analyses in Anthony Everett's 2006 Dynasty, suffered no madness, but narcissistic collapse, grief-forged isolation birthing entitlement, a DSM echo in today's autocrats. Remembering fortifies it, inoculates against forgetting, turning archives into arsenals against recurrence. It's not about emperors or harems. It's what unchecked authority does to the intimate, erasing persons to affirm egos, and how they refuse, vanishing their scratches, enduring like tattoos on history's hide. The empire staggered on 4 centuries, but couldn't efface 18 women's fingernail marks on wax, their faith a flint against the dark. Think on that resilience as the true succession. They didn't taste liberation, but they inscribed refusal, a palimpsest, beneath every tyrant's gloss. Victory redefined is the echo that outlasts the shout. Aemilia, Claudia, Fulvia, Livia, Valeria, they were engineered to vanish. That was the protocol, the final flourish in Commodus's grotesque symphony. Their names struck from Fasti, their forms dissolved into the machine's maw, reduced to whispers in Dio's margins, or faint outlines on Pompeian-style frescoes chipped from Palatine digs. But they didn't dissolve. They're etched still in those oxyrhynchus papyri yellowed and brittle unearthed by fellahin in Nile baskets, in the columbaria of the Via Latina, where libation niches hold faded roses from descendants who never knew them, in the ground of the Horti Luculani, where 2018 sondages yielded ivory hairpins twisted in defiance, carbon-dated to the Antonine era. And now they're here with you, rising from the prose, like figures from a tabula ansata, their gazes steady across millennia. Because you chose to linger, because you elected remembrance over recoil, because you denied their silence the final utterance. Non omnes morimur. Valeria might have murmured in the templum's gloom. Not all of us die. Non omnes. You're not merely a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are the sinew-binding past to pulse the sentinels who ensure that what was meant for oblivion finds voice in the agora of now. To be such a witness demands reckoning. It means carrying their weights in your thoughts, the dry throats and vacant stares, not as burdens, but as beacons illuminating the fault lines in our own citadels of power. These stories matter because they humanize. The abstract power isn't marble arches or legionary eagles. It's the tremor in a hand, refusing the cup, the coded verse scratched in a pallet's straw. They tether us to today, where boardrooms echo with unspoken trades and borders become harems of the desperate reminding that systems don't self-correct. They require vigilant dismantling. We owe the past not pieties, but action amplifying the marginalized in our archives, funding digs that resurrect the erased, challenging the narratives victors peddle as truth. In remembering Amelia's herbarium or Livia's Sabine dreams, we plant seeds against the next machine's grind oaks in stolen soil, reclaiming the earth one root at a time. If this narrative stirred you, if it etched why remembrance is rebellion, drop a comment below. What line lingered? Which parallel pierced? Pose your queries. Let's converse in the comments, grappling with the gloom together. That's the alchemy dialogue, as defiance ensuring darkness yields to dawn. If you hold that voices like theirs merit resurrection, subscribe. Not for spectacle, but for every buried syllable, every palimpsest awaiting light. For every woman scripted to fade, but who inked in eternity refuses.